What if I told you that the Great Flood was a failed sterilization? What if the specific evil God intended to wash away was actually preserved safely inside the only place of refuge? We have all been taught the Sunday school version of the story. We visualize the rain falling for 40 days and 40 nights. We imagine the waters rising above the highest mountain peaks. We hear the terrifying screams of the wicked fading into silence, leaving only the sound of waves crashing against wood. We find comfort in this silence. We believe that judgment was executed perfectly. We believe that the Nephilim, those monstrous hybrids born of fallen angels and human women, were completely wiped from the face of the earth. But there is a massive problem with this conclusion. It is a problem that acts as a piece of forensic evidence we cannot ignore. If the flood killed every giant, why do we see giants appearing again later in the Bible? We see the sons of Enoch. We see Goliath. We see entire tribes of giants living in the Promised Land centuries after the waters receded. Where did they come from? The answer lies in a tiny, terrifying phrase found in the book of Genesis, chapter 6, verse 4. The text says, "The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward." And also afterward. Those three words shatter the simple narrative. If all flesh died in the flood, how did the giant gene survive to appear afterward? This implies that the plan to cleanse the human gene pool was hacked. It suggests that the ark was not just a vessel of salvation, it was a Trojan horse. While Noah was focused on the storm raging outside, a biological time bomb was ticking quietly in the lower decks. The enemy did not survive by swimming. The enemy survived by infiltration. Someone on that boat was a carrier. We know for a fact that Noah was righteous and blameless in his generations. His DNA was pure. So we are left with a locked room mystery that has spanned thousands of years. If the captain of the ship was clean, then who was the traitor? How did the forbidden Nephilim gene pass through the door of the ark unnoticed? To answer this, we must look at the passenger manifest.
To solve this mystery, we must treat the ark not as a religious icon, but as a crime scene. We have a locked room containing 8 survivors. They are Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their 3 wives. Among these 8 people, at least one of them was carrying the genetic code that God wanted to destroy. We must eliminate the innocent to find the carrier. We will begin our forensic audit with the captain of the ship, Noah. The Bible gives us a very specific clearance for Noah. In Genesis chapter 6, verse 9, the text describes Noah with 2 distinct attributes. First, he was a just man. This refers to his moral standing and his relationship with God. But the second attribute is the key to our investigation. The Bible says Noah was perfect in his generations. In English, the word perfect sounds like a description of character. We might think it means he never made a mistake. But we must look at the original Hebrew language to understand the scientific implication here. The Hebrew word used is tamim. This is a technical term. Throughout the Old Testament, the word tamim is used to describe physical perfection. It is the same word used to describe a sacrificial lamb that has no spot, no blemish, and no physical defect. When the Bible says Noah was tamim, it is telling us that his DNA was uncorrupted. His genetic lineage was physically pure. He was entirely human. He had not been contaminated by the interbreeding that was destroying the rest of the world. Therefore, we can officially clear Noah from our list of suspects. He was not the carrier of the Nephilim gene. Next, we look at his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. These men were the biological offspring of Noah. If Noah was genetically pure, it is highly probable that his direct sons were also genetically pure at their conception. They carried the seed of a man who was untouched by the fallen angels. So if the men are likely innocent, our investigation must turn to the unknown variables on the boat. We must look at the women. Here we encounter a strange silence in the text. The Bible is a book that loves genealogy. It meticulously records the names of fathers, grandfathers, and great-grandfathers. We know the lineage of Adam. We know the lineage of Noah. But when it comes to the 4 women on the ark, the dossier is empty. Who was Noah's wife? Who were the 3 women who married Shem, Ham, and Japheth? The Bible does not give us their names. It does not list their fathers. It does not tell us which tribes they came from. In a book that details everything, this lack of information is a massive red flag. It represents a gap in the security logs. Let us apply biological logic to the situation of that time. The Bible tells us that all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. This corruption was widespread. It was a pandemic of hybridization. The fallen angels and their offspring had polluted the human gene pool to a point of near extinction. Finding a pure human bloodline was statistically almost impossible. Noah was a rarity. But for the human race to survive, Noah's sons needed wives. They had to find partners in a world where almost everyone was genetically compromised. Is it possible that in the rush to enter the ark, or in the limited selection available, a woman was chosen who appeared human but carried a recessive secret? A person can be a carrier of a specific gene without showing physical traits of that gene. We see this in modern science with hereditary diseases. A mother can look perfectly healthy, but carry the code for a condition that will only appear in her children or grandchildren. This is the most logical explanation for how the Nephilim gene boarded the ark. It was hidden inside the DNA of one of the wives. But which one? To identify the suspect, we must look at the offspring. We judge the tree by the fruit it produces. After the flood, the families of the 3 sons spread out to repopulate the earth. We look at the line of Shem. His descendants lead to Abraham and eventually to Jesus. There are no reports of giants in this line. We look at the line of Japheth. His descendants populated the coastlands and Europe. While there are myths, the biblical narrative does not focus on giants here. But then we look at the line of Ham. As soon as we analyze the genealogy of Ham, the forensic alarms start ringing. It is from the lineage of Ham that we see the reemergence of the anomalies. His grandson was Nimrod, who grew to be a mighty one on the earth, a phrase that echoes the description of the Nephilim. More importantly, Ham had a son named Canaan. It was in the land of Canaan that the spies later saw the Nephilim. It was the Canaanites who spawned the Anakim, the Emiim, and the Zamzumim. These were all tribes of giants. Goliath the giant was a Philistine living in the land of Canaan. King Og of Bashan, who slept in a bed 13 feet long, was in the land of Canaan. The evidence is overwhelming. The trail of giant DNA does not lead to Shem or Japheth. Every single piece of evidence points directly to the lineage of Ham. If Ham was the son of Noah, and Noah was pure, then the corruption did not come from his father. It had to come from his partner. We have narrowed our investigation down to one person. The suspense is no longer about if there was a traitor. The question is now focused on the woman standing next to Ham. Who was she, and why did she carry the seed of the serpent? The clues to her identity may be hidden in the ancient legends and the strange behavior of Ham immediately after the flood. We have isolated the vector of the infection. The evidence tells us that the Nephilim gene survived the flood not by swimming in the water, but by hiding in the blood. It walked onto the ark on 2 legs, disguised as a passenger. We have cleared Noah. We have cleared Shem and Japheth based on the history of their descendants. The forensic trail leads us to the household of Ham. But Ham was a son of Noah. His genetics were half of the righteous captain. For Ham to produce a lineage of giants, he required a partner who carried the active ingredients for that mutation. We must now turn our spotlight on the most mysterious woman in this entire investigation, the wife of Ham. The Bible does not explicitly name her in the Genesis account of the flood. However, when a suspect is unnamed, we must look at the surrounding evidence and ancient records to build a profile. In ancient Jewish traditions and the book of Jasher, a specific name appears repeatedly in connection to the women of that era. That name is Naamah. This is where the plot thickens. In Genesis chapter 4, there is a genealogy of the line of Cain. Cain was the first murderer. His lineage was marked by rebellion, violence, and a separation from God. The Bible lists the men of this cursed line, but suddenly it stops to mention a woman. It says the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. Why would the Bible waste ink mentioning the sister of a metalworker in a list of wicked men? Unless she was significant. Unless she was the bridge. Tubal-Cain was the master of bronze and iron, the maker of weapons. His sister, Naamah, represents the female counterpart of this pre-flood civilization. Her name means the pleasant one, or the beautiful one. If Ham's wife was indeed a descendant of Cain, or someone from that corrupted civilization, we have found our patient zero. She represents the forbidden union. The line of Seth, which is Noah, was supposed to remain separate from the line of Cain. By marrying her, Ham did not just choose a wife. He chose a connection to the very world God was destroying. But this raises a scientific objection. If she was a Nephilim hybrid, wouldn't she look like a monster? Wouldn't she be 10 feet tall with 6 fingers on each hand? How did she get past Noah? This brings us to the most terrifying aspect of genetics, the recessive gene. Modern science tells us that a person can carry a genetic code without displaying the physical traits of that code. This is known as a carrier. A woman can look completely human. She can have normal height, normal features, and normal intelligence. But inside her ovaries, hidden within her DNA sequence, lies a dormant packet of information. It is a sleeping code. Think of it like a computer virus hidden inside a harmless-looking image file. The file opens normally, the image looks perfect. But once that file is copied or executed, the virus is released. Ham's wife was likely a beautiful, human-looking woman, but her ancestors had interbred with the Watchers. She was the endpoint of a genetic experiment. She was not the giant, but she was the factory that would produce them. Why did Ham choose her? Why did he risk everything for this woman? We must look at the book of Enoch for the motive. The ancient texts tell us that when the Watchers fell, they did not just bring violence, they brought seduction. They taught women the secrets of beautification. They taught the use of antimony, makeup, jewelry, and the art of sexual attraction. The women of the pre-flood world were likely the most physically stunning women to ever walk the earth. They possessed forbidden knowledge on how to enhance their beauty to supernatural levels. Naamah, the pleasant one, would have been irresistible. Ham was a young man.
He saw a woman who possessed the captivating, dangerous beauty of the old world. He looked at the surface, while his father Noah looked at the spirit. Ham was seduced. He brought the Trojan horse into his tent, and eventually onto the ark. The flood came. The water destroyed the civilization of Cain. It destroyed the bodies of the giants. But inside the ark, the gene sat waiting. Then we have the incident in the tent. In Genesis chapter 9 records a strange and disturbing event after the flood. Noah plants a vineyard, gets drunk, and lies uncovered in his tent. Ham sees his father's nakedness. On the surface, this looks like a moment of disrespect. But the reaction of Noah suggests something far more sinister happened. In biblical language, the phrase "to uncover nakedness" is often a euphemism for a sexual transgression. Many scholars believe Ham did not just look. Some theories suggest a ritual of usurpation. In the ancient world, to sleep with the father's wife or to perform a sexual act in the father's tent was a way to claim authority. It was a coup. Whatever happened in that tent, it was the moment the old corruption re-emerged. Ham, influenced by his wife and the dark legacy she carried, violated the sanctity of his father's authority. It was a signal that the rebellion had restarted. The spirit of the Nephilim is not just about size, it is about rebellion against God's order. When Noah awoke, he knew instantly what had happened. He knew that the seal had been broken. And here is the smoking gun of our investigation. Noah does not curse Ham. Ham was the one who sinned, but Noah does not curse him. Instead, Noah says, "Cursed be Canaan." Canaan was the fourth son of Ham. Why did the grandson pay the price? Because Noah was not just angry, he was prophesying. He looked at the timeline and realized that the genetic bomb had detonated. Canaan was likely the first fruit of that recessive gene manifesting. Noah saw that the lineage of Ham, through the influence of his wife, had produced a child who carried the mark. The curse was a quarantine label. He was identifying the carrier of the virus. He was pointing his finger at the boy named Canaan and declaring to the world, "The enemy is here." This explains why for the rest of the Old Testament, the enemies of God's people are almost exclusively the Canaanites. It was not a war over land. It was a war over DNA. The proof is in the history of the Promised Land, where the spies would soon find themselves staring up at men who were too tall to be human.
We now arrive at the sentencing phase of this trial. The crime has been committed in the tent. The timeline has been disrupted. Noah awakes from his wine, and with a prophetic clarity that cuts through his intoxication, he issues a decree that has confused theologians for centuries. Genesis chapter 9, verse 25. Noah says, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be to his brethren." Stop and look at the injustice on the surface of this statement. Ham was the one who entered the tent. Ham was the one who saw the nakedness. Ham was the perpetrator. Yet the punishment falls squarely on the head of his youngest son, Canaan. Why? In a modern court of law, if a father robs a bank, the judge does not send the son to prison. That would be a miscarriage of justice. Unless Noah wasn't acting as a judge. What if Noah was acting as a doctor? What if this was not a sentence for a crime, but a diagnosis of a condition? Noah, the man perfect in his generations, looked at his grandson Canaan and saw the physical manifestation of the anomaly. He realized that the recessive gene carried by Ham's wife had become dominant in this specific child. Ham had 4 sons, Cush, Mizraim, Phut, and Canaan.
but only Canaan received the curse. This tells us that the genetic combination in Canaan was different. He was the fruit of the poisonous tree. The curse was a declaration of genetic degradation. When Noah said servant of servants, he was stripping Canaan of his status. He was identifying him as something less than the pure line of Shem and Japheth. It was a quarantine label placed on an entire bloodline. If this theory is true, we should find physical evidence at the crime scene. We need to follow the footprints of Canaan. Where did his descendants go? And more importantly, what did they look like? The descendants of this cursed boy migrated to a specific strip of land along the Mediterranean coast. It became known as the land of Canaan. This is the very same land that God later promised to give to Abraham and his seed. Have you ever wondered why God ordered the Israelites to completely wipe out the Canaanites? Why was the command so brutal? Leave nothing alive that breathes. It wasn't because God was cruel. It was because the land of Canaan had become the breeding ground for the second outbreak. Fast forward 400 years. The Israelites have escaped Egypt. They cross the desert and arrive at the border of Canaan. Moses sends 12 spies to scout the land. This is the moment the truth comes out. This is our Exhibit A. The spies come back terrified. They give an official military report in Numbers chapter 13, verse 33. Listen to their exact words. They do not say, "We saw tall warriors." They use a very specific legal term. They say, "And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Enoch, which come of the Nephilim." This is a direct confirmation. The spies recognized them. They saw the same monsters that existed before the flood. They went on to say, "We were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight." This is not poetry. This is scale. A man who is 6 feet tall does not feel like a grasshopper next to a man who is 7 feet tall. He feels like a grasshopper next to a creature that is 12 or 15 feet tall. The spies were reporting a biological impossibility. The sons of Enoch mentioned in the report were a clan of the Canaanites. They were the direct descendants of the cursed boy Canaan. The forensic trail is unbreakable. The Nephilim gene entered the ark through the wife of Ham. It was passed to Ham's son, Canaan. And from Canaan, it exploded into a population of monsters that occupied the Holy Land. The Bible continues to stack evidence upon evidence. Later in history, we meet Og, the king of Bashan. The Bible gives us the measurements of his bed. It was 9 cubits long. That is roughly 13.5 feet. Og was an Amorite, another tribe descended from Canaan. We meet Goliath of Gath. He stood over 9 feet tall and wore armor that a normal man could not even lift. Goliath was a Philistine, living in the region of Canaan. We read about the Emim, a people described as great and many, and tall as the Anakim. We read about the Zamzumim, a people great and many, and tall. Every single one of these tribes can be traced back to the lineage of Ham and his son Canaan. You do not find these tribes coming from Shem. You do not find them coming from Japheth. They are exclusively the product of the cursed line. This resolves the paradox of the flood. God's judgment was perfect. The flood did its work. But the enemy used a loophole. He used the free will of man, specifically the lust of Ham, to preserve the seed of the serpent. The curse of Canaan was not an act of anger. It was the first warning siren of a new war. A war not against flesh and blood, but against a manipulated bloodline that stood between God's people and their destiny. But if the gene survived then, we have to ask a chilling question. Did it stop there? Or are we looking at a history that has been deliberately suppressed because of what it implies for our future? This brings us to the most controversial part of our investigation: the cover-up.
We have established the physical evidence. The giants returned. But this leads to a massive theological debate that has divided scholars for centuries. How exactly did they return? There are two main theories. The first one is called the second incursion. This theory suggests that after the flood, a second group of fallen angels looked down, saw the daughters of men, and decided to repeat the original sin. They came down, mated with women, and created a new batch of Nephilim. On the surface, this seems like an easy answer. It explains the giants in Canaan. But there is a major logical flaw in this theory. We must look at the prison report. The book of Jude and the second epistle of Peter tell us exactly what happened to the first group of offenders. God did not just scold them, He bound them in everlasting chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. Think about that. The first group of angels who crossed the line were locked in a cosmic solitary confinement. Are we to believe that a second group of angels saw their brothers screaming in eternal chains and decided to do the exact same thing? Angels are rebellious, but they are not stupid. They saw the consequences. A direct brute force invasion from the sky was no longer a viable strategy. This brings us to the second theory, the theory we have been building this entire investigation, the survival theory. This theory is far more terrifying than a second invasion. A second invasion implies that the enemy is just a thug breaking down the door. The survival theory implies that the enemy is a master tactician. It means he did not need to send more soldiers because he had already planted a sleeper agent behind enemy lines. The survival theory suggests that the Nephilim gene was not a mistake. It was a calculated biological infiltration. Satan realized he could not defeat God with strength, so he decided to corrupt God's creation from the inside out. By hiding the gene in the wife of Ham, he turned the human bloodline into a weapon against itself. This changes the entire nature of the war. It is not just angels versus humans. It is a civil war within the human genome. It means the enemy is not just out there, he is potentially in here. He is using the natural process of human reproduction to keep his army alive. This anxiety was not unknown to the ancients. If we look at the Book of Jubilees, a historical text revered by the ancient Ethiopian church and found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, we see a startling scene. This book acts as a witness testimony that fills in the gaps of Genesis. In the Book of Jubilees, chapter 10, we read about the days immediately following the flood. Noah and his family are on dry land. The world is washed clean. But Noah is terrified. He prays to God because he sees that his grandchildren are being led astray. He realizes that the influence of the demons, the disembodied spirits of the dead Nephilim, is still active. Noah prays, "Let not a wicked spirit rule over them to destroy them." The text goes on to describe a negotiation. Mastema, the prince of the demons, makes a request to God. He asks that not all the spirits be bound. He says, "Lord, Creator, let some of them remain before me, and let them hearken to my voice, and do all that I shall say unto them." The result? God commands that 90% of these dark spirits be bound in the place of condemnation, but He allows 10% to remain on earth. Why? To test humanity. This ancient text confirms our forensic profile. The flood was a reset, but it was not a total sterilization of evil. A remnant was left behind, both spiritually, in the form of these demonic influences, and biologically, in the blood of Canaan. The enemy shifted tactics. He moved from overt domination to covert subversion. He stopped being a giant smashing cities and became a genetic code whispering in the blood. He realized that if he could not wipe out the seed of the woman, the prophecy of the Messiah,
He would try to pollute it until it was no longer human. This is the forbidden history. It is the story of a war that went underground. It explains why the Old Testament reads like a battlefield. It was a race against time to preserve a pure bloodline for the Messiah to be born before the entire human race was compromised again. But the most chilling realization is this: if the enemy successfully hid this gene on the ark, and if he successfully preserved it through the Canaanites, did it ever truly go away? Or has this biological infiltration continued, mutating, waiting for the technology to wake it up again? We are no longer looking at ancient history. We are looking at a blueprint for the future. Because as we speak, the world is racing toward a new era of genetic modification. The tools to unlock the old codes are finally in our hands. And the enemy has been waiting for this moment for 4,000 years.
We are living in the shadow of the ark. For thousands of years, the enemy has been patient. The genetic line of the Nephilim was suppressed, hunted by the Israelites, and driven into the shadows of history. But the Trojan Horse never truly disappeared. It just changed its disguise. Today, we are witnessing the return of the hybrid, but this time they are not coming from the sky, they are coming from the laboratory. Look at the world around you. We are standing on the edge of a biological revolution. Scientists are now openly using technologies like CRISPR to edit the fundamental building blocks of life. They are playing God. They tell us that they want to cure diseases, and that is a noble goal. But the ultimate ambition of modern science is something called transhumanism. The goal of transhumanism is to improve the human being. They want to make us stronger, smarter, and immortal. They want to upgrade us. But you have to ask the terrifying question: if you upgrade a human enough, at what point does he stop being human? When we rewrite our DNA, we are reopening the door that Noah tried to close. We are inviting the corruption back in. The fallen angels of Genesis 6 wanted to mix their seed with men to create a superior race. How is that any different from a scientist in a lab trying to splice human genes with animal DNA or artificial intelligence to create a human 2.0? This brings a chilling clarity to the prophecy of Jesus. In the book of Matthew, chapter 24, Jesus warned us about the end of the age. He said, "But as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be." For centuries, preachers have told us this means people will be eating, drinking, and marrying. But if our investigation is correct, the days of Noah were defined by one specific thing: the corruption of human genetics. Jesus was not just predicting a time of sin, he was predicting a time of hybridization. He was warning us that the Trojan Horse would return. The enemy is once again trying to hack the creation code. He wants to delete the image of God from your DNA and replace it with his own signature. The Ark of Noah was a physical vessel made of gopher wood. It failed to filter out the evil because the evil was hidden inside a passenger. Today, there is no wooden boat that can save you. You cannot board a ship to escape a war that is happening inside your own cells. The new ark is a state of spiritual awakening. It is the realization that your body is a temple, and that temple is under siege. We must be vigilant. We must question what we allow into our bodies and our minds. The seduction of Ham was based on beauty and power. The seduction of the modern age is based on health and convenience. Do not be fooled. The flood washed away the giants, but it did not wash away the gene. It survived in the dark, waiting for us to build the technology that could wake it up. Now the technology is here. The question is, will you recognize the enemy when he offers you an upgrade? The investigation into the Nephilim does not end here. If the giants were driven out of the Holy Land, where did they go? Did they die out, or did they go down?
If you want to uncover the truth about the underground cities and the evidence that they are still living beneath our feet, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. The files are being opened, and you do not want to miss what comes next. This is the end of the report. Stay awake.